What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Art Wars stream. This time we are going to be talking about the most impactful changes from the balanced data slate. And in this one, we're going to kind of be bringing some of our experience from the games we've been playing recently and kind of adapting to the new meta. So
That's right.
it will be similar to the data slate review, and that will be going over some of those changes, but we're going to be more looking towards the predictive meta and how it's going to impact it in various important ways.
Yeah, I think this balanced data slate is pretty impactful to the game and in ways that some people might not realize. So let's chat about it.
Yeah, so we'll be going through in no particular order. It does say top 10. We've picked 10 things we think are important. We're going to do them in whatever order we feel like, so accept that. But we're just going to be going through them and kind of discussing them and keep this more discussion-oriented, as we like to do.
Yeah, as we were selecting the changes, we were like, this doesn't fit neatly into a top 10 list. Let's just talk about it.
Yeah, it's something 9 versus an 8. That's hard to say, but they're all important changes.
Absolutely.
Which is great. So, before we dive in here, if you like this type of content, please give us a like, subscribe to the channel, tell your friends about us, and leave a comment below letting us know what you think of our list, what we missed, what you think is very impactful in the games that you've been playing with the new balanced data slate. And in addition, if you want more content, we're pumping out tons of new content on the balanced data slate, including a whole wide range of games. If you want to check them out, this is the last day of our 50% off sale on our own platform, the warham.vhx.tv. So if you want to sign up, use the code new40kbalance and you'll get 50% off your first month, and just try it out. There's also a 3-day free trial if you don't want to dedicate even farther. Just try some of the games. We put on some very high level 40k games. And if you haven't been here before, check out our live YouTube game, which is going to happen tomorrow, and that's going to be Votann versus Tyranids, which is an exciting matchup, and one that I think is going to be hard for me. So tons of content to check out. We really appreciate everybody's support, and we're going to go ahead and dive right into these most impactful changes and our discussion of them.
Yep. No tier list today. That needs a little bit more to cook.
Yeah, so we do want to do the faction tier list. Great point, Jack. But it's taking us a little bit of extra time. We want to get as many games as possible, as much knowledge and information surrounding the changes. And so we're looking at probably next week, maybe the week after. But it'll definitely be in February. So if you've been waiting for that faction tier list, don't worry. It's on the agenda. But it's going to happen just after we get a little more data.
All right. Well, let's jump right in.
Okay, so
we did forget one, by the way.
We did forget what?
We forgot to change. I'll get to it at the end.
Honorable mentions, man.
Honorable mentions.
We always love our honorable mentions. All right, so first one up is going to be the reduction of damage in the game. This is something that if you started playing at the very beginning of 10th edition, the damage of the game was outrageous.
Yeah, they were like, don't worry, the damage is worse. The damage is less from 9th to 10th. And
less rerolls, less damage.
It was actually a meme for a bit, but now we are actually there. The damage is way down. A lot of the top armies. It's also not just a reduction in damage, a reduction in power level. Mm-hmm. Because what's the strongest armies? What are the strongest armies in the game right now? There's basically two. There's the hyper-competitive, like, Marine builds. There's the Templar Gladius and the Ultramarines Vanguard. And then there's the Necrons. Necrons didn't get changed. Mm-hmm. And the Space Marine builds did get hit a little bit. So what that means is you had the top of the meta that was this powerful. This is where the top of the meta is now. They removed the top of the meta, and then this is where now the new top of the meta is. If that makes sense. The point is that the power level of the game has dropped because they took the big dogs out, but they didn't elevate somebody else up to how powerful they were. Yeah. Those two armies that were removed would still be the most powerful armies now if they were unnerved. So that means the general power level of the game has come down, and that's a big deal.
Yeah, and this is something that they've done for basically 3 updates in a row. The mid 10th edition, summer update to mostly Aldari, and then they had the September balance update, and now this one. So armies like Thousand Sons GSC previously got hit in earlier updates because they did ludicrous amounts of damage. Now, they haven't targeted in all these updates specifically the damage dealers. Sometimes it's just they have less stuff and the army's harder to play because of that, instead of nerfing their rules directly. But this time they went for both rules changes and also points increases on those kind of key damage dealers in Eldari, CSM, etc. Tau got crisis suits going up. So a lot of armies got hit where their unit that just is very hard to interact with and kills you, just simply kills you dead. Doesn't matter, you barely have to roll dice. They stopped, or at least put nerfs on those units.
Yeah. So I'm very happy the power level of the game has dropped. There's still a lot of armies that are very viable. In fact, I would say almost every army is viable right now. And I think that's a great position. I think we're kind of used to looking for that very stratified meta of who is terrible and who is like the S, A, B, C, D tier thing. It doesn't really work anymore because everybody is kind of in that kind of crunched power band. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it reminds me of kind of like maybe right before the end of 8th edition, before the Marine Codex came out, where you could pretty much throughout that summer play any faction, have a realistic shot at winning an event. Some factions were better than others, but you had a chance. Yeah. And we're as close to that as possible.
Yeah, there's a couple of outliers, but generally they aren't outliers in the upward direction. There's like, there's a couple armies, there's always going to be an army that's the best, and there's a couple that are good, but you can compete with a wide variety of armies, and you can beat the top dogs with a wide variety of armies, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, like Jack said, there are a couple armies that are towards the bottom that will need some further buffs, but hopefully that becomes very evident.
Yes.
Anything else about reduction of damage? In my personal opinion, 40k is the most fun when you play 5 turns. When it's a close game, it's going to come down to a couple small decisions at the end of the game. And
it's a lie. You like your crippling damage. Don't tell me otherwise.
I do love crippling damage, but not like turns 1 or 2.
Yeah.
That I don't like.
Yeah. Like Chosen have come down in terms of damage. The Chosen Lord package is just does not do as much damage as it used to. It still hurts. The World Leader's Master of Execution does much less damage. Like the Wraith Guard are much less good. Like they tone down a lot of those damage dealers. There are still armies who skew heavily into damage as opposed to survivability, and that's a perfectly viable way to go. Black Templar, Gladius, and World Leaders right now are my 2 picks for the highest damage armies. Custodes also puts out a decent amount, but isn't particularly fast. So I think there's still damage if you want to find it, but it's not like overwhelming end game in 1 turn levels. And I think that's good. And it's not across the meta, too. Everybody's taking ridiculous glass cannons and just pointing them at each other.
Yeah, but you saw that at the beginning of 10th edition, where it was just like, I'm going to have my 1 key turn and an opponent's dead. We don't play the rest of the 40k. Yeah. It's just over. So I just don't think that and especially for newer players, it means that you go into your local game shop, your opponent has more experienced player, is bringing a really strong list. You just get slapped out of existence in a single turn. You're like, why am I playing this game? It's not about the decisions, it's about the list. Yeah. I think it's more about the decisions now, less about the list, which is a great place to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
What do we got?
Ignore mods. So ignore mods is something that was very heavily debated for a while. Some events like WTC ruled one particular way, Games Workshop events ruled a different way. Finally, we have a consistent ruling on ignore modifiers. And It is to the positive that it does ignore things like damage reduction, half damage, minus damage. It ignores modifications to your AP, like Armor of Contempt. This is a big, big deal because it means some of the things that skew towards I'm too durable for you to deal with has an answer in the meta.
Yes.
And so you can't reliably say that I'm going to run, 4 to 6 Catan nowadays and just shove them into the middle against certain armies because they're going to be like, cool, I've ignores mods. Dead.
Yeah, Trajan
just doesn't work.
Level a half damage like a Catan or anything like that. He doesn't care. I've run a lot of ignores modifiers units. I've run Trajan. I've run Grandmaster quite a bit. And a lot of the defensive abilities in the game are modifiers on your opponent. They're -1 to hit, -1 to wound, -1 to AP, -1 damage, half damage, anything like that.
And often multiple of those.
And often multiple of those stacked on top of each other. So you just cut right through all of that if you have ignores modifiers. And they're not so prevalent that it's a problem, right? It's not so prevalent you're like, oh, I won't take a Catan. Obviously, people are taking Catan right now. But it feels like that ability actually works. And that's nice. Because if it didn't ignore Armor of Contempt and -1 damage, then it's not worth including. We've seen that. Like, it's not that good if it doesn't ignore those things. Occasionally ignore -1 to hit. Occasionally ignore -1 to wound. Who cares?
Or your OC0, instead of being OC0, you're OC1. Something. It's like, it's fine.
Yeah, even just ignoring Armor of Contempt, there's a lot of armies that have it. Every Marine chapter has Armor of Contempt, and Grey Knights and Votann have it. And then the armies that don't oftentimes have -1 damage, like World Leaders or Custodies. So, or Necrons have half damage, or the Incarn has half damage. So it comes up across the board quite a bit, and those abilities now feel like they're good as opposed to useless.
Yes. And I think overall the meta is going to like having these type of units, because you already see both of us are running the Grandmaster and Grey Knights. Trajan is basically slapped right into every Custodies list.
He is so good.
And then Grim Demeanor is right back in every single Votann list. So now these armies are going to be out in the meta, and if you're trying to rely on those defensive mechanics as your only edge over opponents, all of a sudden you play these matchups, you can't. Your list has to do other things.
Yeah, and they have a unit that ignores modifiers. If you have a bunch of Catans, like, oh, okay. All right, they have a unit. If you can't play around one unit that can cut through your defenses, then that's probably a problem with your list. Ignore modifiers is very important right now because Necrons are one of the top dogs, and Catan are really tough to deal with if you don't have something specifically to deal with them. So if you have access to something that ignores modifiers, other things would be the Silent King for the mirror. Mortarion has an aura of ignore modifiers. There are others, I believe, out there. Those are all very good and very impactful.
Yep. All right. So moving on to Drukhari Sky Splinter Assault Force. So Drukhari, in my opinion, was probably the worst army in the game.
Yeah, I would agree. If your name wasn't, Scary, if your name wasn't Rizvan Martinez, then you probably weren't doing well with Drukhari.
Yeah, like occasionally you would see them like pop up in a GT top 5, but it was very rare. And at the end of the day, it was just an army that was a glass cannon that also didn't have a cannon. So it was just glass.
It was all glass, no cannon. It just sucked. Like, its guns didn't do anything except for Dark Lances. Its melee was laughable. Like, its melee was garbage. It's so bad. So you just relied on having Dark Lances on very fragile bodies that would just die. It was terrible. It was just bad. It was probably the worst army in the game. Scary made it work occasionally, but, it was the worst army. Now it's no longer the worst army. And I would say it was worse than Edmech, for sure.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. But the Sky Splinter is not. The Sky Splinter is so cool. It's probably the coolest single change that they've made in a balance patch ever. They just released a whole new, with how anemic the old detachment was, they basically released a new army to the game.
Yeah.
And I think that's awesome. It amps up their damage in combat, it amps up their mobility, they have tricks now. And now units of Incubi, Lilith, units of just random units in combat are actually scary now, but not to the point where it's crazy.
Yeah. It's strong, but it's not just obliterating army. It's not too much damage.
No, my guess is they went from a 40%-ish army, a 35%-ish army, up to a 45 to 50%. I don't think they're clearing the 50, but they are a awesome army. And if you want to play them and you want to get skill into playing them, then this will reward it.
Yeah,
very strong.
One of the things I love about this is that they put a lot of effort into this detachment. This isn't just Drukhari's bad, let's just quickly come up with something that works and is a bit better. No, they actually put real design thought into this detachment, how Drukhari should play, what types of tools and tricks they should be able to do, and then they made it very player skill oriented so that better players are going to get more out of this detachment than a regular Drukhari player. That requires effort. So I don't know how long they've been developing this, but this is really, really well designed, and the fact that they did it in a balanced Dataslate gives me encouragement that eventually they might go back to some of the other detachments out there that are not working as intended and not doing what they should be. Space Wolves, yeah, you got a slight buff, but that as we talked about in the review, it's not what the detachment.
There is no Space Wolf slide in this presentation. I'll tell you that much.
So Sons of Rust, but Drukhari, I'm very excited because I think there are several armies with detachments out there that could use some sort of change.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not a whole detachment, it's just the detachment rule itself gets changed, maybe a couple of the strats get changed, maybe the enhancements. I don't know, but I think I'm very encouraged that they've done this because at any point there are some really underperforming detachments, they're willing to look at them.
Yeah. Somehow they took Drukhari, which was an army that was fragile, it did no damage, and had no tricks, and turned it into an army that hits hard in combat, is still fragile, so you have to play around it, but has some really intricate and nuanced tricks. And I think it's an amazing army. It's super fun, super flavorful, and it amps the... Like, they took garbage data sheets and somehow with a detachment made it workable. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah. It's downright impressive, frankly. All right, moving on. Custodes buff.
The Reign of Gold is here, baby! Okay, so last balanced data slate, Custodes got hit, right? They got hit pretty bad. They lost their 4-up against devastating wounds. They got points increases. Squad sizes went down. It was a rough time to be a gold man, for sure. Here's the thing. I've been playing them before the balanced data slate came out, and I was like, damn, these guys are actually pretty solid. They're not bad. They could use a little bit of a help. Like, they weren't like a complete well-rounded army, but they weren't bad. I took them to a local tournament here, and I think I got first, and I think Quentin got second. And I was using the Custodes, and I was like, damn, these guys, they're actually got some power here. They're actually quite strong. And we'll see what they get in the balanced data slate. When the balanced data slate comes out, well, my list got 100 points back, and you get the 4-up against devastating wounds, which isn't a ton, but most armies in this, as we talked about in the first bit, are going in this direction, right? They're going down. Custodes didn't just stay where they were, they went up. A not insignificant amount, I'll tell you. It's 5 points a model per infantry model, so you can really span them out if you feel like doing that. Or you can take the tanks if you feel like doing that. And then you also don't have devastating wounds cutting right through you. And I feel like by rounding out Custodes, I think they've taken them from like an okay army to being like, I would say, a top 5 army. I would say they're like 4 or 5 or something in there now.
The reason that I would say that this is not simply an impactful, but a good change, yes, we don't want to take a faction from like mid-tier and all of a sudden bring them up to this is too strong. But I don't think they've done that with Custodes. They've made them strong for sure. But it gives me encouragement that they can take a lower army, one that's around like the lower than 45%.
Yeah.
And take them right up to, I can play a game into pretty much any faction.
Yes.
That is very encouraging because there are a handful of armies down there that need that level of support. And if they're willing to do it for Custodes, they should be willing to do it for those other factions. And I think they found the right balance here where Custodes are not going to be overtuned. They're going to be strong and they can play into every army now, but they're not going to be overpowering the meta. And there's a fine line there.
Absolutely. They didn't elevate Custodes to above, like they didn't elevate them to like number 1 or anything like that. They didn't make them more powerful. Like they didn't raise the overall power level of the metagame by raising them up because they didn't push the ceiling higher.
They didn't make them old Eldari.
They didn't, right? Like they didn't undo the nerfs that would have been a real problem. The squad size nerf would have been really bad if they'd changed
And free
that.
fights first.
Free fights first is, like all of that stuff would have been, the squad size change, if we had 10-man Custodian Guard bricks running around right now, they would probably be the best army in the game. And so I'm happy they didn't do that. That playstyle was super boring, and it would have been just miserable to play into. But Custodes right now are just like a well-rounded army that can take on a wide variety of other armies, and it does not feel overpowered. They're good, they're not... What was it? They're strong, they're not dominant.
Yeah, they're strong but not dominant.
They're strong, but they're not dominant. And so
I think that'll hold true.
I think that will hold true. I'm actually very excited for where Custodes are. I've been ramping up to be playing them in like team events and things like that. I think they're super good. I'm just excited for it.
Okay, World Eaters. So this was an army that had a very high go first win rate.
Yes.
And it was an army that if it got into the center of the table, it was very hard for a lot of the meta to interact with it because either they come up and they have to do like cripple the World Eaters, which was hard to do, or they come up and then they're dead.
Yeah,
you immediately get hit by a whole World Eaters army that kills you.
Yes, you've played into the Eaters more than most.
I'd say, yeah.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I love World Eaters, okay? I played them to Tampa, to GW Tampa, and I got second place there. I've played them a variety of times. I love the army. For winning the ITC last year, I got a free 2,000 point army, and I asked for World Eaters, and I have it, and I've been building it. So I love the army. So I'm not some World Eaters like, Faker or whatever. I love World Eaters. It is very easy when we saw the changes to freak out and overreact. I did it for sure. Siegs can tell you.
I did. I was there.
You were there when I was like, why would they kill the army like this? Anthony also had the same basic reaction, jumped ship to Drukhari, and was like, why would they kill World Eaters like this? And then I did the World Eaters State of the Faction that we put up in the War Room. And I was like, wait a minute. Hold on. They didn't actually change that much. So World Eaters before, if you knew how to play them well, and they were a hard army to play because they didn't have a ton of moving pieces, and you had to use your pressure properly. If you just jammed your army into your opponent every time, you would get killed more often than not. You had to pick your moment carefully, bleed resources, and then know when to jump. So it was a difficult army to play, but if you did know how to play them properly, it was like I think it was number 4, right? It was a top 5 army, no questions. It was very good. My list lost 60 points, which is not crazy, right? That's less than most. And the Master of Executions got changed to be worse, no questions. And Favorite of Khorne got changed to be once a game. Cheaper, it's 20 now instead of 30. But it is once a game instead of once per battle round. Here's the thing. I think those changes are less than most armies at the top of the meta changed. Black Templar Gladius changed like 100 and change points, 100 and something points. Depending on how you reconfigure the list, it changed like 120 or somewhere in that vicinity. John's Ultramarine Vanguard changed 170. It's still ticking. It's still a very powerful army. So is the Templar Gladius. CSM went down a lot more than World Eaters, or went up a lot more, and also had significant rules changes that gutted how they worked previously. Same with Eldar. So the top of the meta went. World Eaters, by comparison, did not go down nearly as much. So I think World Eaters took a nerf, and I think it's fine. I think that they took a nerf that is very manageable and very sustainable. 60 points off of my list. I don't know how much Anthony's list went up, but I think it was even less than that. I think is totally fine. And I think I would still personally run Favorite of Khorne, because I just really want it for that one turn. Mm-hmm. And having the Juggernaut Lord is he's not like a bad unit, right? He's a good unit on its face. The only thing I would change is potentially taking the Master of Execution, turning him into Karn. You save a little bit of points off that, and now you have a better answer to Catan and that sort of thing, because he makes a 10-man unit, reroll 1s to hit and wound, and +1 to wound, and so I actually think World Eaters are in a fine spot. I think after looking at it, and Siegs can tell you, as I said, I did freak out about World Eaters. Everyone who's played World Eaters is freaked out about it looking at the changes, but I think it's okay.
Yeah, and the reason that this is impactful is, once again, it shows that with very careful, targeted nerfs, you don't have to drop a faction like a stone all the way down to mid-tier or below. You can make a strong faction less strong, still a good army that does exactly what it should be in the lore on the tabletop, but isn't absolutely completely gutted. And I don't think they did that with any of the armies. Even CSM, even Eldari, I think they're still strong. They did get hit harder than World Eaters, but we'll get to them in a second.
They got hit. They got hit quite hard.
They get hit, but they needed harder hits.
Yeah. So I actually think World Eaters stayed roughly where they were, just because they came down about as much as the metagame as a whole did, and I think they're in fine shape. I would totally play them. I'm considering there's a GT coming up this weekend, and it's either them or Templars I'm going to play. It's just which one I feel like playing at the moment.
I think the consistent, careful World Eaters player really loves these changes. The World Eaters player who's just trying to throw their army out every single turn and take crazy risks is going to be punished, as they're a little less consistent.
I think people are going to jump ship because the narrative on World Eaters is that they're dead, and I don't think that's the case. I do think people are going to jump ship. And I think that's fine. If you want to jump ship to a different army, find your fun where you find it, right? I'm not here to judge you. But I do think that'll bring the win rate of the army down, even if the actual win rate shouldn't probably go down that much.
Yeah. All right, heading over to Chaos Space Marine nerfs. CSM, what a ludicrous... Talk about damage. I mean, the army not only had great board control elements, but it also had outstanding damage. Some of the absolute best in the game. There was rerolls all over the place. There was insanely high damage. There was lethal hits, sustained hits, everything
Lethal,
that you could...
sustained 5s. You can't shoot them. They reroll hits and wounds.
Cursed Cultists were one of the most annoying control units you could play against. They just had all the great tools, and they had tools that played really well into Eldar, which was not many armies could say.
Yes. Yeah, it was a bit tough to determine if CSM or Eldar were the best army in the game. CSM was incredibly hard to tech for. CSM, it was basically impossible to get an army that consistently had a favorable matchup into CSM, because how do you have a favorable matchup into an army that's hard to interact with and outputs ridiculous damage? And has like just a couple too many units. There was basically no way to tech for CSM past like getting to an even matchup. If you had a really good army and you teched for CSM, you got to a 50%. Congrats. If you had a really good army and you teched for Eldar, you could beat them consistently. But Eldar did more crazy things, right? Wraithguard and Night Spinners and Phantasm and the Incarn and Fugan and all of those were just like ridiculous to a level that CSM wasn't. But CSM was much harder to tech for. So that, like power level, I think they were roughly even.
Yeah, I would say so. Like how I thought about it was Eldar fundamentally broke the tenets of 40k by just doing everything better than everybody else.
Yeah.
They had like the best version of every possible rule. And then Chaos Space Marines, they played the game of 40k, but played it better than anybody else.
Yes.
With the transport, the trades, the amount of damage that they did, they just played the game of 40k better than the other ones. And so you tried to mimic like CSM with your original Black Templars build. Like, I love that concept of what they're doing. How can I do it with Space Marines? And then I was like, with Tau, okay, I like what CSM were doing. How can I do it with Tau? And we kind of, for WCW, created lists that like did something similar to CSM, but not anywhere to that level.
It was the best way to like try and play into CSM, was just to try to do their thing, but slightly worse. Like for a bit, I was wondering, hey, is the Templar Gladius the same power level as CSM? And it's like, no, it was a little bit worse. Not a ton. It was a broken army, but like it's a little bit worse. And CSM, it just, you couldn't interact with them, right? They're transports that you couldn't shoot over 12 inches. They had a Cursed Cultist that would regen and were too tough. All of it hit too hard. All of it moved too fast. You had Forge Fiends that hit with the force of God himself, just coming in and rerolling hits and wounds, or sustained 5s and just leveling you. And there was a limited amount you could do about it because they also just had a lot of units. Like the MSU variation had an insane amount of units because they were all... Basically, the detachment in the army rule was a rocket launcher that each random 100-point unit would just get handed, and it would just shoot you with it. And you're like, oh, damn, why did that do so much damage? It's because they took a bunch of randomly 100-point units, 110-point units, 180-point units, and just handed them, hey, would you like full reels to hit and wound and sustained hits? And they were like, yes, I would like that, actually.
The power level of CSM really goes to show you how strong a lot of the indexes, or a handful of the indexes, were at the beginning of 10th, because this is the army that evolved out of the September update. Like before that, CSM was like a solid army, but it wasn't one of the top armies. They got a bunch of points decreases, and everything around them kind of got a significant hit.
Yes.
And so they were dramatically elevated because of the huge nerfs and big buffs to them.
Yeah.
And I think they've avoided creating a new CSM.
Yeah, I think they didn't get huge buffs. I think they were the Necrons of the last one, where they just didn't get hit at all.
They got a lot of points decreases.
Did they really?
Yeah.
Okay, then never mind. Yeah, they, I think we're going to see what people can do with CSM. They got hit very hard, but I would be surprised if they didn't take a little bit of time to, like, come up with new ideas and recover. I'd be surprised if they couldn't.
When I look at their rules and then I look at a lot of the other factions in the mid area, I'm like, wow, Chaos Space Marines still have really good, strong rules.
Yeah.
And they still do more consistent damage than most armies out there.
You can't make the same list you were taking before. That much I'll tell you. You can't make the same CSM lists and try and force it to work again. They do not fit. They don't hit hard enough. They don't do what they need to do anymore. So you do have to go back to the drawing board, and we'll see. I mean, they got hit pretty damn hard, but like only the offenders got hit hard. So we're going to see if they can go back to the drawing board. There's a lot of units in there and see what they can do.
Yeah, they kept the decreases on the other units for the most part.
Yeah.
That went down, like Raptors or whatever.
So we'll see what CSM players can come up with in the future. Speaking of which,
Eldari nerfs. And once again, we have our, like every 3 months, the Eldari players are like, my faction's dead. And we find out, no, it's not even close to dead.
yeah, I mean, I think they did it. I think they finally hit Eldar hard enough that it's no longer the best army in the game. It's only been 8 months of pure, unadulterated Eldari filth. Again, like, let's take a look at World Eaters, okay? World Eaters got touched. CSM and Eldar got hit.
Yeah,
they got hit.
And they needed it.
They needed it. They needed it very much. But again, they largely hit the offenders, right? Mm-hmm. If you were running a whole bunch of Aspect Warriors, your army probably didn't change that much. Phantasm changed a little bit. It was a broken strat. It is what it is. But Wraithguard got hit very hard. The Incarn only teleports on their player turn, so it's much easier to interact with now. It's still good, for the record. Still not terrible.
Teleporting into your opponent's backfield and then charging something to kill it is just good.
Teleporting into their backfield, flaming a character to death, teleporting where that character is, and then charging their backline and then killing that. And then something on the other side of the board dies in combat to another unit, like Fugan or something, and then the Incarn teleports back out. That will still remain a broken interaction, and you can still do it.
Yep. And for the same points.
And for the same points.
Go.
Let's go.
So, Elda, that's still good. The regular Avatar of Cain is still awesome.
Yeah, he's amazing.
He's fantastic. Wraithguard did get probably the most significant hit. You might say Night Spinners, they went up in a lot of points, but they got somewhat of a side grade on their datasheet change, which is that you can now interact with charges. -2 to charge is huge.
-2 to charge is huge. They did not need that. So I saw something on Reddit where people were like, "Why are people mad that the Night Spinner got changed to match everyone else? I thought they were mad that it didn't match everyone else." It's like, no, that's not what it is. It said Eldar are too good. Why did the gun get side graded instead of degraded? But that aside, they did go up 30 points. I expect you will still see them in lists.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
I would say, in my opinion, Eldar, in the hands of a top player, was the most consistent army in 40k. It was the one where you could exercise a ton of player skill, but also you just had better things than everybody else. And doing that turn after turn, your opponent was more often going to just make mistakes at some point, and Eldar are amazing at capitalizing on mistakes.
Yep, they're very good at picking a way around the edges and then diving for you the million units that move too fast. They definitely got hit really hard. Phantasm going to D6 is a huge change. I think you won't see Wraithguard again, not for a bit. Phantasm being D6 instead of 6 is huge on them. The fact they can only shoot back at the thing that shot them is huge. Their bases are so big that it's very likely if you get a beat on them, they won't actually get to safety with Phantasm, and then you just light the unit up. And also, Fate's Messenger being just for the bearer means that you can't save them and make their guns better. So
yeah, 6 fate dice as well, so you can't just keep pumping as many as you want into them.
Yep, I have heard from Eldar players that 6 fate dice is fine, from like Quinton and Matt Schuckman, people like that who are playing. That the 6 fate dice is workable. I mean, obviously it's not ideal, right? But it's workable. So I think a lot of these nerfs are workable. I think Wraithguard are going to be. I don't think you're going to see them. I think they did get hit. They got hit in points. They got hit like 30 points through a model. They got hit in Phantasm. They got hit in Fate's Messenger. Their shoot back is now a shoot back instead of a shoot anywhere. So I think Wraithguard definitely got hit hard enough. But the rest of it, I think they're fine. A lot of the characters and stuff didn't change. The characters are really good. A lot of their Aspect Warrior units didn't change. The avatar didn't change. He's really good. So I think there's a lot of options there for enterprising Eldar players to still do really well. But they did tone down the more nuts elements of it.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for that.
Yeah. You know, Eldar was one of those factions you could really tailor for and actually beat. I think there'll be less emphasis on specifically tailing for Eldar, which might help Eldar overall remain as like an A-tier army. Because I think they're still quite strong.
Yeah.
Frankly, anybody who has a detachment roll, reroll hit and wounds, and then also access to Phantasm, even if it's less consistent, is still strong. And I think I think some Eldar, maybe there's going to be just more diversity in Eldar lists now, where you're going to have a more MSU version and a more, I have all the durable stuff, you know, double avatar, I still kill you dead.
Yeah. Same thing as CSM. I expect Eldar players are going to go back to the drawing board, redraw their lists, come back. I think their lists are going to be perfectly fine. I think they're going to be perfectly fine. I definitely don't think they're going to be, you know, best army in the game. I think they hit them hard enough, but we'll see.
All right.
That's what we thought last time, too.
Precedent to changing weapons. So the Dread Knight is something that finally received an upgrade. It was an enormously inconsistent platform and was never taken, whether the Grandmaster or the regular variant, and that's because the hammer hit on 4s and the gun was Strength 9, AP 1, 3 damage.
I think it was Strength 10, AP 1, 3
Or
damage.
Strength 10, yeah.
But, like, who cares, right? AP
1 doesn't ignore cover, might as well be 0 AP, because it's just, cover is automatic in this edition. So it was a unit that did nothing. And it was a problem because Grey Knights were kind of shoehorned into a specific style of, you have to run Terminators, you have to play a janky, you know, charging type of style, and keep away from your opponent before you jam into them. And that's really the only play style that existed for them. Now, with the change to the Dread Knight, I genuinely believe that Dread Knights are solid. I don't think they're world-beating, I don't think they're like ludicrous, but they're just good.
They're solid.
They're just a solid unit that you can, if you want a ranged weapon that can do a reasonable amount of damage and some solid enough combat with his ability to fall back, charge, advance, and shoot and all that stuff, then this is a unit that you can run. So I think Grey Knight's list design, this is probably the best internal balance change that they did, where you genuinely have an option to run a different style of Grey Knights that didn't exist at all before.
Yeah, Dread Knights were just a kind of a joke. Right, they had some decent abilities. They were kind of durable, but their offense was garbage. And right, because you get +1 to hit, or your weapon skill on all of your melee weapons has gone up by 1, which is great.
Yep.
Because hitting on 4s with a hammer, even for a Grandmaster, was garbage. That's just terrible. And then the Psy Cannon the heavy Psy Cannon being AP1, no ignores cover, is essentially AP0 because everybody has ignores cover now, or has cover nowadays. So being AP2 ignores cover is basically +2 AP, and that's huge. I think you can run any amount of Dread Knights you want. I think you can run even the full 6 if you felt like it.
Yeah.
But I also think you can run 0. I ran a game that's going up today is the 3-brick Terminator list that I like particularly. I played that, but you played a multiple Dread Knight version, and I think both lists are good. So if you want to run either, you totally can.
Yep. Now, why this is super important is because I think at the beginning of the index stage, a lot of armies didn't receive the proper strength or AP or damage on certain weapons. There are a bunch of armies in the game that just don't have the proper weapons on certain units, or they're not consistent enough. And I would love to see this precedent added to those armies in a future update to just increase the internal diversity and options of a lot of armies.
Yeah.
There are a whole bunch of units in the game that need this, and they can go up in points. You can give them a really strong upgrade, but then they go up in points. That's totally fine.
Nobody wants Dread Knights to be 130, right? But
Exactly.
like they might have needed that to be good before. Nobody wants Dread Knights to be that cheap and spammable.
No, we want the unit to do its role, and a different role than what we have elsewhere. That's what they need to do to more units in the game, and this precedent makes me excited that they might do that in the future, because there's some bottom armies that really need that type of help.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's super cool. I think the change they made to Grey Knights really does open up some shooting options that straight up did not exist before. But you can still run it the old way, and I think that's still fine too.
I think solving problems that's not solely by points is super important, and the fact that they're willing to do it, in this balance update gives me hope for future ones.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Changes to detachment and army rules. So this is one of the things that I've also been harping about because there are a bunch of detachments, Sons of Rust. That
Sons of Rust did not earn a place in this graphic because they changed so little that, like, whatever.
it's changed to be from an irrelevant rule to an also irrelevant rule.
Yes.
So there are some detachments and army rules in the game that just aren't good. And instead of forcing factions to be stuck with these for months and months, or if they get a codex for years, the willingness to go back and edit those, even if it's a relatively minor quality of life buff, is still important because you can always go back into these and change them. They're willing to do that. Yeah. That I feel is super important. So Guard got their army role, the voice of command, upgraded so that they can do it out of transports and coming in from reserve, which helps Scions. And maybe we won't see this in too many games, but we totally might see it with Scions and the Primera Psyker combos and things that they can do. On the other hand, Blood Angels, their detachment role was okay.
It was fine. It helped. It certainly did. +1 strength, +1 attack was like good, and I would still want to play with it. But +2 strength, +1 attack is honestly, that's hitting the point where you can take like random units with chain swords and make them hit really hard. And it's like, oh, that's very interesting now.
Yeah, and they still play exactly like Blood Angels. It's not a huge change, but it makes what Blood Angels should be doing better. Yeah. I think that like Born Soldiers, the rule for Guard, their detachment rule, I believe, can be changed to be better. I wish they did change it as well. I think there's a whole bunch of armies down there that need that type of change to make their army design more interesting and to make their army do what they should be doing.
They did this with Votann actually last time, right?
Yep, we're 4 judgment tokens, and it was hugely impactful.
It was hugely impactful, and I think that's super awesome because their detachment last time, their detachment bonus was kind of garbage. It was like you picked one unit and you got your judgment token against that, and if you killed that one unit, then you got your CP. It's like, ugh. You had to call your shot, and your opponent would be like, well, I'm not doing it then.
The bigger problem was that token generation was so difficult that you never got enough by the time your opponent just overwhelmed you.
Yeah.
And so the army didn't function. Yes, you have judgment tokens, but it's impossible to get enough of them quick enough.
Yeah, it's like, just don't worry, lose your army, and then you're fine. Then you have all the judgment tokens you want.
Then the remnants of your army can actually do something. So they have been willing to do this in the past. The fact that they're willing to just go back and an army that's maybe between 45 and 50%, just throw some sort of buff in there. I think they could have gone a little farther, frankly, but the willingness is the important part. And I feel like the scope of this balance update, a lot of the different things they were doing, which they hadn't done in the past or didn't do to this level, is really encouraging because it basically means the whole game is wide open. Anything could change for the better, so you're not stuck with terrible rules for months or years. They're willing to go back in there, whatever that rule is, and potentially fix it.
Yeah, basically they've shown that there's no element of the game they're not willing to tweak. Yep. So I think that's a good place to look at. I'm excited for what this means for Sons of Sanguinius. It certainly doesn't hurt their odds. I think Sons probably needs a little bit more help to be good, but like whatever, right? Like you get a little bit of a change, maybe a little bit of change in the future, then a codex, and we'll see where we're at.
So that's all the ones that we talked about, except for the honorable mentions, Mr. Jack.
So I think the biggest change that we have not discussed is I think demons have changed quite a lot. Mm-hmm. Not just demons as an army, but demons as an ally have changed. And I think that's going to be a very big deal for the meta right now because it is much harder to use demons as an ally, and demons themselves got a lot better. So it used to be you only saw demons as an ally. You would see either the Tzeentch Lone Ops or Nurglings. That was basically demons. That's all you saw. And they would be allied into either Thousand Sons or CSM or Death Guard. That's basically it.
Chaos Knights too.
Chaos Knights, yes, thank you. You would see them in Chaos Knights as well. But demons have gotten massive point drops basically across the board. I think Nurglings are the only thing that went up, and they went up a skosh. They went up 5 points, so it's not that crazy. Not per model, per unit. But the rest of demons has come down a lot. And I think that is very good for where demons are. I know Nick is thinking about them. I know that there's a lot of units that seem just like a little too cheap for their stat line, right? And that's a very interesting place to build an army from. Things like Keeper's Secrets, Great Unclean Ones, Blood Crushers, those things all came down to like very intriguing points values.
Tasty, in fact.
Yes. So I'm excited to see what Demon players can do with that, with getting a bunch of extra units on the board, hopefully. But Demon allies, if you want to take that tasty unit that you want to take, you got to include a battle line of the same god before you can do it. And this, for Death Guard, this changes not a hair. For Chaos Knights, changes very little. You still get the Nurglings, you don't get the Tzeentch Lone Ops unless you want to buy pinks. For 1,000 Suns, that is a big deal. They really like just taking the Tzeentch Lone Ops. You can't do that. I talked about in my State of the Faction, I'm actually not against taking pink horrors in 1,000 Suns. I do think it works very well with how that army wants to play. I think that's fine. CSM, you basically get your Nurglings. You don't get to have the Tzeentch Lone Ops for freezies. And you also don't get to have Selesky for free. You have to take Selesky and a unit Demonettes. Now, that unit does not hate being together, right? Demonettes plus Selesky, she makes them very good. But you have to do that, right? So you have to put a little bit bigger of an investment to get those really good characters that you might want. I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, I overall think that's a positive change because, as you said, if you keep reducing the points on demons and you can just take, now obviously some of the sub-factions have specific restrictions, but if you can take a lot of different things, you just take cheap data sheets, and that kind of does exactly what Imperial agents were doing early on with exaction squads, where you just take the cheapest thing and you throw it into your list and you have a resource. And so now you actually have to make a tough decision and have some sort of other piece in there. So if you want allies, you're going the extra mile to get them.
Yes. And I think, honestly, the ally changes don't matter that much because Nurglings are battle line. If Nurglings weren't battle line, it would throw the whole demon ally thing into chaos. Get it? But I think because Nurglings are battle line, it doesn't really affect Death Guard at all. It doesn't really affect CSM or... because CSM has Cypher if you really want to loan up. It affects Chaos Knights some, but not to a crazy degree. It affects 1,000 Suns a decent amount, but I honestly don't hate pinks in that army, so heck, there you go.
Yeah, but Chaos Demons getting a lot of interesting changes. We still haven't seen like the full effect of that yet. You know, we're still waiting to get a bunch of Demons games against Mr. Nick, and I'm excited to see them on the table because I haven't played against them, but they have janky rules, they have interesting mechanics, and we're going to get plenty more Chaos Demon content coming soon.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Well, let's go through some of these super chats. Thanks so much, everybody, for hanging out with us.
I pronounced Selesky correctly. Selesky is a different model from Shalaxi. They are different units. Although I do like a Polish Shalaxi being like, Skoskeski.
We've got Andy Downs. Thank you so much for joining as a member of the War and Bronze. Make sure that you sync your Discord account to your YouTube account and gain access to our awesome Discord server. Then we've got Ultramar himself, $5 super chat. Thank you so much. Siegs, ages ago you suggested I should only own a single army due to my schedule, and it has been super helpful. Well, I'm glad it's been helpful. The thing is, if you only have a certain amount of time, the better you get with a particular faction means you can kind of walk into any edition or any different game and just be good with that faction. Like, Skari with Jukari.
Absolutely.
He's just always a master of Jukari because he loves that army, he plays the most with it, and the reps really matter. Experience with a faction matters a lot.
Yeah, and you do get a lot out of a very deep knowledge of a faction. Like, you know the combos and the things to take that other people might not, and you have that like deep knowledge. I think it can help.
And that's a big part of taking an army that is seen as less powerful and beating into your top armies.
Yeah.
Tyranids with a $2 super chat.
Just the army, the Tyranids.
The Tyranids army itself. I see a lot of nerds here eager to become biomass. Very funny. Not us, though. We're not going to become biomass. Then we've got Johnny Coyote. Thank you so much for the €5 super chat. What do you think about using War Dog Brigands in World Eaters? Cheers for some awesome content. Thanks so much, Johnny. How do you feel about that?
I think it's all right. Right, Brigands are a fairly efficient unit on their face. They're all right. They went up in cost. They went up 10. So they're not as efficient as they used to be. I think they're good. The problem is, I think by taking them, you cut into critical mass of World Eaters resources that you need. So a list that sacks like enough to bring in 2 to 3 brigands, I think cuts too much World Eater out of the list to the point where you can no longer do the World Leader thing when you need to do it. Because you do run light on units in World Leaders, it's just kind of a fact of the matter. But if you want to take Brigands, I'm not against it. It just would be a little bit of a slower, more control-y playstyle rather than controlling the board with pressure and then using the ability to jump on your opponent at any time to mean that they have to back off and let you control the objectives.
Then we have Jordan Churchill. Thank you so much for joining as a member of the War and Bronze. Really appreciate your support. And then we have a couple more super chats here. Red Drum with a €2 super chat. Jack, what GT are you going to this weekend?
I believe it is the Onslaught GT. I will look up the name, but that sounds correct to me. It is relatively local to me here. It is the Grand Onslaught 7 in Florida. And I am almost certainly not playing Custodes to it because I am expecting to grind Custodes for team events in the near future, and I want to mix things up. So it's probably either Templars or World Eaters, and the more I talk about one army, the more excited I get. So if I talk about Black Templars, which I did yesterday a bunch, I'm like, Templars, we're going Templars today, baby, let's go.
No, you just talked about World Eaters.
Talked about World Eaters, and now I'm on the World Eaters train, so that's how life goes sometimes.
All right. Then we have the next super chat, which is from Grokvar. Thank you so much for the $5 super chat. Great content, holding out hope for some positive AdMech change in the next update. It's going to happen. They are going to be down there languishing with some of the hardest armies to play in the game. So it'll happen. Whether it's going to be impactful, we'll find out. But this update gives me hope because of the scope of it.
Yeah.
AdMech need weapon changes, they need some data sheet changes, and they need an army rule change.
They need more than just, here's even cheaper units.
And you can't make their units cheaper. They're one of the most expensive armies to collect. It's ludicrous how expensive it is to get like a competitive AdMech army. So instead of making them cheaper, they need to make them do what they should be doing. And they did a lot of that in this update, so it makes me very encouraged for AdMech.
Yep. All right.
Then we've got Giacomo S. Thank you so much for the €2 super chat. Demons versus Custodes on stream.
Yes, please. Can I have that?
It is a matchup we have played before, and we certainly will play again. I believe the Demons are playing a bunch of games coming up,
yes.
So we'll let you know what those ones are when we post our schedules.
Nick was taking a bit of time to get his lists together, but we're gonna
There's
see
a lot
some
of
that.
painting, in fact, hobby work, as one might say.
That sounds wrong. From Nick?
Yes, he has to. And then we have Wah with a $2 super chat. Thank you so much. Join the Wah, Jack. How can we beat Golden Boys / Death Guard?
Yeah, so I'm not gonna lie to you. Custodes is rough for orcs. You can't just be AP 1, damage 1. You have to have some amount of like knobs, things in there like that. And then if you want to get around their fights first, you have to charge them, be willing to die, and spend fight on death. So they fight first, they kill you, fight on death, you hit them anyway. If you fight on death, they cannot pop -1 damage in response because it's when a unit activates, not when their models activate, so you still get your hits there. You can also do things like taking the Gazgul brick and then buffing a unit with lethal and sustained 5s, like a 20-man unit of boys that Sean Naden was running at LVO. That unit, when it hits, is 1,000,000 AP 1 damage 1, that lethal sustained 5s, and so you can really hit your opponent with that. Like if you take a 20-man unit of Beast Snagga boys right now, it's a little on the expensive side, but not crazy. If you hit your opponent with that, it's strength 6, lethal sustained 5s if Gaz is nearby with 1,000,000 attacks at AP 1. That will put enough saves on Custodes that it will really, really hurt. You do need the ability to make them pop their feel no pain in shooting, so something like a unit of Flash Gits would be really helpful, things like that. The Beast Snagga Boy unit also mulches Catan at a rate that needs to be seen to be believed. There are 1,000,000 attacks.
Anti-monster, right?
Anti-monster vehicle, actually I don't think their regular attacks are anti-monster vehicle, but they are strength 6 with reroll hits, and if you include the Gaz brick, it's sustained lethal 5s. And that will just, because it's like 100 attacks.
Yeah, it's like, okay, 4-ups into 5-ups is good, but like...
Not when you take 80 saves. Yeah, you just cut right through Catan with that unit. So if you want to try that, you'll also cut right through Wraiths as well, because you just have 1,000,000 attacks with sustained lethal 5s. So if you want to try that unit would actually be pretty good into the gold. I played a game into Quinton, I believe, for our Halloween special. I think it was our Halloween special. So I think it was on YouTube even, if you want to check that out. Not a lot relevantly changed about Custodes in that game. So if you want to check that out, it's on our YouTube. I played orcs into his Custodes, and I did win that game.
Then we have Frank von der Voren. Thank you so much for the €6 super chat. How about Khorne, Lord of Skulls, in a World Eaters list?
I believe it went down to 450.
It's 450.
I know it went down to 450 in CSM. That is cheap. That's cheap. And it also gets back Angron pretty damn reliably. Because if you kill 2 units with it, which is not hard, Angron gives it reroll hits even in shooting, just not on turn 1. If his reroll hits doesn't just apply in shooting, you just start it in the charge phase to the next charge phase. So turn 1, you don't have it up. Charge phase, reroll hit aura. Following turn, it hasn't gone away. You have your reroll hits aura, and you choose it again in the charge phase. So he gets reroll hits from Angron. I think I may have sent Karn there, but he gets reroll hits from Angron, and he brings Angron back. Down at 450, that's very tasty. It shoots very hard. I don't hate it. I really don't hate the Khorne Lord of Skulls. If you have one, now would be a good time to use it. You start with Angron, you start with the Khorne Lord of Skulls, and you fill out the rest of it with melee pressure. And I think you can get there.
Yeah. What about triple Lord of Skulls?
Angron 3 Lord of Skulls fits. That's all I'll say. It fits now with some room to spare.
Then we've got Grokfire with a $2 super chat. Thank you so much. Forget to ask, is the faction tier list this week? We are putting some additional editing effects and cool stuff into it. So, be patient, but probably within the next 2 weeks, we will release that. So stay tuned, but very soon we will do our full faction tier list. We're also getting a lot more games to bring that type of data to bear.
Yeah.
And then finally we have Shane Dupuis. Thank you so much for the 2 Canadian super chat. Good morning, everybody. Good morning to you. I hope you have an amazing day, and I hope everybody has an amazing day, including you, Jack.
Thank you. Thank you. You know what? You. No, you.
So hopefully everybody enjoyed this one. And if you did, please give us a like, subscribe to the channel, tell your friends about us, and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought of the list, what you've been really excited about from the Dataslate changes in the games you've been playing. All of that massively helps the channel. In addition, if you want more Warhammer content, please do check out our War Room, thewarroom.vhx.tv. Today is the last day of our 50% off sale, and use the code NEW40KBalance in order to get access to 50% off your first month of the War Room on our platform. And otherwise, there's always a 3-day free trial available for you to test it out if you haven't already. And we have tons and tons of content. Just released Jack Theory for this week on non-interactive units, and there's state of the factions for each of the different armies. This week we'll finish out that list. So if you're looking for a quick synopsis on where your army sits and what some of the lists you might want to experiment with, go ahead and check out those state of the factions. But otherwise, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Have a great, great day, and we'll see you all tomorrow for the sweet game that we got in the War Room this week, which is Tyranids versus Votann. That's on YouTube tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And then on Thursday, we have Fix My List, which is going to be Balanced Dataslate Edition. Jack and I will be back on for that one. So please do join us. If you're in the War Room, you can go ahead and submit a list in the Fix My List submission channel.
Absolutely. All right. I think that is it for us for today. We will see you next time, everybody.
See ya.
Peace.